It's must-win time for Carolina. Otherwise, they're going to be sitting out of the playoffs for the first time in franchise history.
Honestly, we're just worrying about one game at a time. If we do that each game and grow each game, hopefully we're in a position to take home the championship at the end of the year.
And what a catch in the end zone! Incredible stuff from Grayson Sander.
Will he have enough juice? Yes, he will! He's on fire!
Yeah!
Welcome back. It's Swing Pass. I'm Adam Ruffner. That's Evan Lepler. We are recording this on Thursday, June 5th, spanning between weeks 6 and 7. And once again, it just feels like every single time we get into this recording session, Evan, it's a new narrative and storyline and set of standings that we have to look at and reorient ourselves around. And once again, with the results from week 6, with Atlanta dropping their 2 matchups in the Central Division against Minnesota and Chicago, with Carolina getting 2 wins, with the East Division just rock, paper, scissors, kind of disordered chaos of whichever matchup wins kind of wins that particular game. I mean, it's just, I don't want to be redundant, but it's chaos. It's just chaos week to week right now.
It was an unbelievable weekend. There's no doubt about it. That Atlanta-Chicago game was maybe my favorite game I've watched this season. And I separate the games that I call and the games that I watch. But I watched every second of the Hustle and Union Saturday night. And it was just one of the great regular season games we've seen. Like, Atlanta played so well despite being shorthanded. And Chicago counterpunched, and just the way the two teams went at it, and the bunch of different highlight reel plays and the clutch plays and the momentum swings. And like, neither team was perfect, but just, it was one of those games where I didn't want it to end, and it almost never did. And it was an unbelievable, centerpiece to the week. But it was far from just that, because Atlanta's game in Minnesota the night before was also fantastic. And, every East Division game feels like it's coming down to the wire and tells a different story. Colorado finally showing up in a way that we kind of expected them to, with Tobias Brooks throwing for roughly 9 million yards in his first game as a member of that Summit team. Like, it was an incredible weekend, but I do think we got to start kind of through the lens of Atlanta and their 2 games at Minnesota and at Chicago. And we could dive into any number of situations from each of those 2 games. I think my biggest takeaway is, I still really believe in Atlanta. Like, just want to put that out there, despite their 2 losses. Very easily could have been 2 wins. B, I think they have things to work on, and I think, like I wrote in the toss, as Ben Feldman said last year, like the wind chill were propelled by their losses. I could see the same thing happening to Atlanta. And C, and this might catch you off guard, Adam, and I don't mean to spoil a future midseason awards, and we still have a weekend to go before we hit the exact midway point of the season. I think Austin Taylor might be my MVP right now. I was so impressed with what he did against Chicago without Holzmeyer, without Knoll, and the night
reading
before.
My diary, because I was on a walk with my dog this morning, and I was having a similar self-discussion around who I'd choose for MVP. Holzmeyer, Heyman, but I came to Draco as well.
Well, that was the thing about Friday night's game, and I was reading your power rankings in bed last night at probably midnight.
Wow.
And the word that you used, Minnesota's defense rearranged Atlanta's offense, was really smart in the power rankings. You wrote that. And I'm like, because I talked to Ben Feldman afterwards, and that was their goal. They wanted to get Austin Taylor downfield and away from the disc as much as they could, because they just didn't want him picking them apart. They're like, if Brett Holzmeyer's in the backfield, great. If Cameron Brock is taking shots, fantastic. Even Hayden Austin Nab has shown some flutters of inconsistency. Taylor is the rock of that team. We saw Adam Miller had to have some hiccups in the Minnesota game as well. So, like, I still believe in that offense. And the reason why is just Austin Taylor is playing at a level higher than I think he ever has, which is saying something because he's been really good for a long time. And they lost both games.
Yeah. I concur with you. I still have a lot of confidence in this Atlanta team. I thought they battled really well against two of the league's top defenses. But on the flip side, I think, both Minnesota and Chicago showed a blueprint of how you can kind of stand up this hustle attack. And it's that disconnection of their kind of 1 to 2 to 3 movement down the field. Through their first 6 games, you just kind of saw these uninterrupted chains of backfield to midfield continuation to we're shooting it downfield to Holzmeier or somebody in one-on-one coverage. And it was the recipe for absolute success. I think, were the league leaders in offensive success rate up through week 6. But this Minnesota defense, I mean, they did what they did at championship weekend last year. I think they've done this repeatedly throughout the past couple of years when they're at their peak performance. They simply take what the offense likes to do and completely remove it from the board. And you just saw last Friday night the Wind Chill's ability to absolutely frustrate the hustle from getting any kind of continuation game going. It was this constant sort of, we'll be able to matriculate it upfield 10, 15 yards at a time, but then we got to dump, reset, redistribute it across the width of the field. And at that point, you're playing right into the strengths and teeth of this Minnesota defensive coverage, which is Justin Burnett, Dylan DeClerc getting to blitz off the backside and try to just tee up blocks, or kind of having these high stall, situational, almost punts downfield, and Minnesota just swarming over the Atlanta hucking attack. And look, Atlanta had their 2 worst deep performances since the league began tracking the Huck stat in 2021 this past weekend. They had their worst performance ever against Minnesota, and then their second worst performance the next night against Chicago. These Central Division defenses are simply on a different level in 2025, and I think we've kind of been talking about it in the abstract, and this was a real-life kind of science experiment of, hey, we've got this top South Division offense. What's it going to do against all these sort of trap double teams and defensive field position scheming? And you're not going to score many points, right? I mean, this is a real, I think, bona fide sort of pedigreed guaranteeing of this division's defensive play. What Chicago and what Minnesota can really do to shut down opposing teams.
I think you're absolutely right. I think we need to say elite Central Division defenses because not all Central Division defenses are built the same way, as you know.
True.
But, I mean, it speaks to the fact how the hustle, they were like number 1 in Huck percentage. They were number 1 in fewest turnovers. They're still number 1 in fewest turnovers per game, by the way, even after turning it over 36 times in their 2 games. Their season average jumped from like 11 and change per game to 13 and change per game, but they're still number 1. And their Huck percentage is now 4th in the league. So it was really interesting to see how the hustle had to evolve on Friday night against Minnesota with what they did. And look, Saturday was just a different beast because there was no Holzmeier, there was no Knoll after he hurt his shoulder. And there was a different shape to Atlanta's offense without those guys. And it was really interesting to me. I mean, were you pulling your hair out like I kind of was with neither team being able to get it out of a sideline double team trap? Like, I don't feel like I've seen good teams struggle with that like the way they did, but it's a reminder to us and kind of to everybody that even great offenses can be flummoxed by a really good double team, especially if it's not consistent. I mean, you think of the best guys who have gotten the disc off the sideline in the past. Like, I don't think there was anyone better than John Lithio with New York.
I was just going to say him. Are we mind melding this episode?
Yeah. We're connecting. It's great.
Yeah, no, John Lithio is fantastic.
And Holzmeier was starting to take that role on, and he wasn't quite at the level of consistency or confidence as Lithio. But without him, like Austin Taylor was trying it, Hayden Austin Nab, Michael Fairley crossed over onto the O-line to try to handle some, and it didn't go particularly well. Fairley was amazing defensively, but also had some throws that I know he wants back. So it was just really interesting to see those teams adapt on the fly. Yeah.
That end of the third quarter, I mean, the Union almost completely slipped out in a banana peel, it felt like. It was a close game, and then they just, what did they commit? 2 or 3 straight first throw turnovers coming out of that double team on the sideline, just gifting the disc to a hustle defense that effectively handed it off into the end zone. And it was remarkable, to your point of the kind of mental discipline it takes right now to sort of walk the plank against these elite defenses. There's just no room for error. If you mess up one throw at the beginning of the possession, suddenly your offense can't get off the field, and suddenly these defenses are just building on a lead from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 right in front of your eyes.
No doubt. Nate Goff had some huge plays in the game. The top 10 guy was breathtaking. But he also, Lucas McClamrock's doing some very Ben Katzy things out there defensively.
He's doing everything.
Just with the way he moves, with his speed, with his instincts, with his ability to command a team after a turn. I mean, he was really good for Atlanta, especially in Chicago on Saturday, and it speaks volumes that he was out there, on the big points late in the game, whether they were on O or D. All the top players. This was a really hard week to pick the honor roll. A, because there were 13 games, and B, because there were a lot of great players that, had a lot of good, but also a couple, real pivotal mistakes. And when I'm thinking about who I want to give the honor roll award to, like I'm looking for excellence. I'm looking for contributions to winning, and it's no specific formula, but it was tricky. There was a lot of guys that could have been mentioned. Like, I don't think I mentioned Brandon Van Dusen's name in the 7,300 word Tuesday toss, and I mean he was the mistake-free guy for Chicago this past week, who just, he was kind of the Austin Taylor equivalent for the Union. And the other thing, and let me just mention this and I'll ask you the question. Like, were you as surprised as I was that Pavel, after not really being a fulcrum of offensive possessions, like he only played 8 or 9 points in the game before overtime, and then all of a sudden with a game on the line, the disc is running through him? Like, what does that say to you about the Union and about Pavel, and maybe what his role continues to evolve as going forward?
First off, a couple of broader points about the Union. You mentioned Goff, and I've got to make a comment about that play where he just towered over everyone in the stadium, it felt like, to bring down that goal early in the game. I just think when the Union show and flex that kind of power, it really introduces the notion that this is a championship favorite this season, because there's nothing stopping that A to B connection if they've got Goff and rhythm. You mentioned Van Dusen. I thought he deserved a place on your honor roll, given the kind of discipline he's shown in his first couple starts for this Union team. And you mentioned the throwing. How about that defensive play he made after the incredible Jakeem Polk block near the end of the first half? Hustle having a chance to get a break and go up one going into halftime, and instead Van Dusen making a terrific layout block of his own to get the disc back for the Union. Now, Chicago wasn't able to cash in on the hold, but still, I felt like they stymied a potential momentum builder for an Atlanta team that just had to crawl tooth over nail to stay with the Union in this. And, finally, to what you asked about Pavel, I think a lot of times we like to side-eye that guy, and I think as he's the quickest to point out, a lot of his stats maybe have a lot of high-calorie filler in them, let's say. But when he plays games like he did on Saturday night against Atlanta, I do think it's a reminder of the kind of competitor he is. And I think that that's something that we do discount him for at this point in his career. He hasn't always been big in big games. I think that that's been kind of one of the skeptical points you can bring up about his career, as historic as it's been. But when he, again, comes out and dots the I on the end of that Brandon Van Dusen layout block, no, I was mistaken a second ago. It was Pavel who then hit Wilson Matthews in transition with an absolute pinpoint huck attack, one of his only deep throws in the game. And then to your point, in the closing moments, is the QB1 leading the attack. I mean, this is the thing that's kind of been lacking in Pavel's career, this ability to make the big throws in the big moment. Like, that's what he showcased on Saturday. I'm not going to make the mistake right now. I'm not going to make the throw into the flat that gets away from him that has historically happened in big games in the past. Like, he was an absolute rock for them all night. He was pulling the disc. He was playing his ass off in coverage. I mean, I know we kind of like to smile and grin when we talk about Pavel on D-line. He was out there putting in his reps, man. He was digging it out. And on a team like this, if he's the 7th best defender, that's trouble. That's a lot of trouble for the opposition. So I just have big praise for Pavel after that win.
He was great in the big moments. I think the thing I'm most curious about going forward, because where does he rank, among the top 20 of the Union right now? I mean, he's playing D2. If they wanted him to have the disc and carry more load, they could put him in that role. He seems very content to do less for a really great team. And yet did they go to him at crunch time because he was super fresh, because he had only played 9-10 points? Or did they go to him because they trusted him most with the game on the line, or a combination of both? The thing I'm thinking about, it'd be like if the Oklahoma City Thunder, let's get the ball to Isaiah Joe and let him make the decision at the end of the game. Like, Isaiah Joe's a really nice player, but he's not the go-to guy for the future NBA champion.
That's not the comparison. No, that is not the comparison. Again, like, you're talking about the all-time leader in completions. He's not exactly irreparable with the disc. It's just that I think in the past, sometimes there's been this notion that he needs to make, the biggest throw at the end of that game. And I think, we saw the opposite of that on Saturday, where it's like, no, what he needs to do is just lead this impossible to stop red zone offense where they're just going to swirl the disc around until they find an easy handoff for the game winning goal. And that's exactly what they got. Let's just reduce everything to a very simple, just pitch and catch. And there's no one in this league's history who's played more pitch and catch with the disc than Pavel Giannis. And that's, a recipe for success for a Union team that doesn't need him to do everything, doesn't need him, as you got in the quote in your Tuesday toss, to scrub the urinals. That is not what Pavel needs to do at this point in his career.
You're paraphrasing, but yes.
Yeah, but that is kind of what it felt like he needed to do for the Union for his first several seasons, back when they were the Wildfire. It was that kind of, janitor keys level, I gotta, take care of all this kind of utility man. And I think now that he has a refined role, now that Van Dusen has a refined role, now that everyone on this Union team is just kind of next man up, it's capital T trouble. Also, I want to mention Jace Brunner, man. That guy's a human hand grenade right now. Like, you just roll him into an upline situation, he's going to produce a block. He's going to blow that disc up, man. He is so good at tracking anything in those tight little spaces in crucial parts of the game. He's one of those, re-additions that have happened over the offseason where we're going to continue to bring him out throughout the rest of the season.
One other guy that absolutely needs to be mentioned, because Pavel doesn't throw the game-winning toss in overtime, double OT without him, Xavier Payne. He's all defense in the league through his first 2 games, because he's got a bunch of huge blocks and big moments. Just a primetime player. Xavier Payne, he's always been good with Indy, but he's finding his role really quickly with Chicago. It's fun to watch.
I don't want to extend the analogy or the metaphor or whatever too far, but there's another couple of urinal scrubbers right there. You talk about Xavier Payne and Brandon Van Dusen. I mean, guys who were asked to do too much for teams that weren't exactly winning a lot of games. And now they get to come into a really good system on a really talented team and just sort of refine down to a specific skill set, which both of them can do very, very well. And look at the results. I mean, both of these guys are playing like all-stars, and we've always known that about their talent level, but now they're doing it for a winning team.
Yeah. So Chicago from here, like they have Madison at home
Run the table
this Sunday. Maybe it's not out of the question. I don't think they will run the table, but it is a very fair question. And 11-1, 10-2 feels like the floor for the Chicago team after what we've seen in the first two games. And for Atlanta, I was just thinking about it as I was putting together the Friday night six-pack for this week's broadcast. So the Hustle could clinch a playoff spot with a win at Carolina this weekend, despite the two losses last week. Now, mathematically, I think technically it wouldn't be clinched yet because there's a road where, Houston and LA could run the table. But for all intents and purposes, Carolina can't catch the Hustle if they win this weekend, and LA and Houston are not going to catch the Hustle. So this weekend could clinch a playoff spot for Atlanta. It also could tighten up the race considerably. It could bring the Flyers within one game of Atlanta, and the Hustle have another challenge against the Soul in Atlanta. They also have to go to Carolina one more time. There's a lot riding on the game this coming weekend at Carolina. And I don't know if this is where we want to segue, because I have a bunch of more thoughts we could talk about for these two Central South games. But, the Flyers this weekend saved their season, and now they have another opportunity to save their season and to really throw a wrench into Atlanta's season if they can finally get one against the Hustle on Saturday in the game of the week.
Well, and isn't this just a perfect microcosm of this whole freaking season, right? I mean, we go from a couple days ago 0-4 Carolina and 6-0 Atlanta to now, 10 days later, the possibility that Carolina's within a game of the Hustle in the standings? I mean, that's insanity, Evan. We haven't seen turnarounds like that in the past where you just have a team on life support, potential life support, going to just back in the thick of it. I mean, it's Carolina, it's Montreal, it's potentially Toronto if they can get a win as well. I mean, right. I think we should focus on the matchup that you introduced, Carolina and Atlanta, but it's just, there's so many reversals going on throughout this league right now. You think a team is dead in the water, and then all of a sudden they kind of look a little frisky a couple days later.
Well, games are closer generally, and there's just more variance. And also teams, look, we don't want to dwell on the fact that, kind of our evolution towards professionalism is still a work in progress, right? We're still a semi-pro league. Players for the most part aren't making their full living playing Frisbee, and that creates difficulties. Like, a lot of years, a lot of the best teams in the league didn't practice regularly. And that's still true for a couple teams, but for the most part, there is legitimate progress being made because teams are making more of a commitment to train outside of just team training weekends, to practice once or twice a week. And I think with the best teams in the league and in the biggest moments, you are seeing that. Like, this is a Montreal team that has been working and building for several years, even spanning coaches. They lose Toba and we write them off, but they have pretty much everyone else. They add Jeremy Hill, and they're a really competent, confident team that has playmakers. And like, I was on a call with
started lifting. Yeah. That's an underrated storyline we could almost talk about. I mean, he's playing like maybe the best player in that division right now. I'm not joking. He is impossible to stay with on the field.
If you're watching, sorry, Are you referring to Christophe Tremblay-Jonca? Because that's who.
I mean,
he's a different kind of athlete.
Both of them right now, I think, have the potential to be one of the best players, if not the best in that division. I mean, as topsy-turvy as the East has been, I know we're kind of moving away from you talking about the South Division matchup between Carolina and Atlanta, but yeah, let's put a cap on the East for a second. Let's get back to the game of the week with Atlanta and the Flyers, because I do think we should put a little bit more emphasis on that, because to your point, this game could potentially tighten the South Division standings even more. If Atlanta drops a third straight game, if this, I think what really needs to be shown is, can this Carolina defense continue to play with a sort of intensity and pressure beyond just hunting for layout blocks on the under? I think sometimes the Flyers can content themselves with the idea that they're producing a fair amount of turnovers, but there just isn't enough, break scores on the other end of those quite yet in the season. And against this, hustle offense facing them for the third time this season, I think it's a good opportunity for Carolina to show why they made it to a championship game last year. This is a Flyers team that historically has played very good defense. And so far in 2025, they've been kind of a sieve. Last week they did well at Philadelphia containing that Phoenix offense, but they really struggled through their 4 losses this season in preventing any kind of offensive attack.
I don't know if you were watching the Carolina-Philly game live at the start, but the first quarter of that game was awesome, back and forth, offenses trading punches ultimate. It felt like Scott Heyman did the triple play on the opening point of the game, where he scored a goal, threw a goal, and had a block. And that's because the goal that he threw was called back because of a stall, I believe. But then he got the D and scored the goal. So it felt like he had all 3 on the opening point of the game. And it felt like Philly was going to throw haymakers the whole way. And then they had that miserable sequence at the end of the first quarter, and Carolina could capitalize. Instead of Philly being up by 1 or 2, it was Carolina in control. And then Philly, as Sean Mott told me, and I quoted him in the Tuesday toss, hung their heads a little bit and kind of lost their mojo and never were really the same. They made a late little push, but Carolina was in control of that game basically from the midway point of the second quarter on. And it was certainly Philly's poorest performance of the season after a really strong start. And I bring this up just to say, Carolina and the way they handled the Phoenix in the second quarter and the way they dominated brutal Pittsburgh in the first quarter, a Pittsburgh team that was just throwing it into the ground at times, throwing it into Mark's hands. Atlanta's going to be a more tougher task for the Carolina defense. Atlanta's much closer to DC, maybe even superior. We've seen the Flyers struggle to have that defensive punch. So that's my long labyrinthine way of getting to say, you're right. The Flyers need to step up this weekend. They've got the players to do it. Atlanta's still missing some key guys. There's no Christian Olsen. Cameron Brock is out this weekend. Sean Canole's return is uncertain after his shoulder injury. He was getting an MRI a couple days ago to determine the extent of that, but it's probably at least a month or 2 for Canole, who, by the way, told me that he's watched the replay of that 10 times, and he still doesn't know how he hurt his shoulder with that roll on the block right by the Hustle sideline on Friday night. It was a strange play. But, yeah, I think, this game comes down to, does Carolina still have the championship DNA of the DeNardis era? For so long, we have just trusted that the Flyers would show up for big games and make big plays and not be scared by the moment. And it is a new era in Carolina with a new coach and so many of the key players from the championship run in 21 and even the championship game run last year stepping aside or injured. Do they have enough of that championship DNA to take care of business at home against a really good Atlanta team that's your rival? I know I mean, Tuba Benson-Jaja said before the game last week, he said, I'd much rather win the 2 games against the Flyers and eliminate them from the playoffs than win the 2 games in the Midwest Division this weekend. He said that before either of the Minnesota-Chicago games. So that doesn't mean they didn't want to win, but eliminating the Flyers would mean so much more for Atlanta, and they basically have a chance to eliminate them from any sort of home field and most likely, make it really, really tough for Carolina to have any shot at rallying back toward the playoffs if they can send them to 2-5 this weekend. But it's not going to be easy because Carolina's going to come to play.
Yeah, I mean, Atlanta will need McClamrock to show up. They might need a little garlic, and some coffin nails to really put away this beast of Carolina because, I mean, we see it week to week. They're starting to wake up. And, I mean, Alan Laviolette is playing as good as any offensive player in the league. Jacob Fairfax continues to be him. Like, I just don't know that there's a more reliable receiver right now active in the league, historically speaking, than him. Just in terms of what he can do for an entire offense. He just can provide kind of everything. He's so consistent in his production in this league. And then it feels like they're just starting to kind of scratch their surface. Like it feels like they haven't been playing with their confidence. Now that they've got 2 wins behind them, Rutledge Smith and John McDonald continue to look better and better each week. I do not want to catch this Flyers team kind of as they get a rhythm. Them and Toronto kind of coming out from those 0-for starts. Both of them are just so athletic, so fast across both lines. You do not want them later in the season if they can kind of climb out of these holes in the standings.
Yeah, and I mean, you didn't ask me, but I have no idea who's going to win this game. I think, man, who's the favorite? I was going to say Atlanta's a slight favorite still, and I think I lean that way. But it feels like a 53-47 favorite. Like this, I got that much respect for the Flyers and their just kind of institutionalism of their system and their success and the way they go about their business. Through the years that teams go on the road and bond, and for Carolina to go through Pennsylvania and get 2 pretty convincing wins. The way they did says a lot about the leadership of this team and the potential of it. And I think, but there's also got to be that sense of desperation for Atlanta, which is crazy to say because it felt like a week ago they were going to cakewalk into the playoffs. And all of a sudden, if they're 4-3 and, let's say San Diego beats Austin. So then Austin would have 1 loss. San Diego would have 2. And yes, I'm penciling in Austin's win over LA. All due respect. I think Austin gets that game on Friday, but Saturday's tough. So San Diego could get it. Then it's the Soul with 1, the Growlers with 2, the Hustle with 3, and the Flyers with 4. And, the Hustle only have 3 games left after that. It's crazy to say because Chicago's still got 10 games left. But Atlanta's season is almost over, and they could clinch their playoff spot, or it could get pretty hairy depending on what happens this weekend in a place where historically they have not won very often. They have not played particularly well at Carolina.
It's hard to beat a team of this caliber 3 times in any given season. I mean, that will be a pretty terrific accomplishment for the Hustle if they can pull it off. I wanted to kind of reflect over, we brought up the Carolina-Philly matchup. I wanted to use that as a jump-off point for talking about the East Division. Because you have this Phoenix team that started off white hot, 3-0. They get a win against DC. They're kind of biggest monkey on their back that they've come closest to knocking off the past several seasons. It's kind of a storybook start out of the gates for Philly. And now they've suffered 2 straight losses, and it's kind of pitched them back into the pit that is this East Division standings. You got 4-0 Boston, and then you just got a mess beyond that. Because with Montreal picking up...
It's a beautiful mess, though. It's a beautiful mess, isn't it?
It is. I love it because you've got Montreal with back-to-back home wins against New York and DC sitting at 2-3. You've got Toronto getting their first win against an Empire team that has historically been their little brother going back to the very beginnings of this league, but that Toronto hasn't beaten in several seasons. They finally get that win and their first of the season. Again, Philly is at 3-2, Montreal is at 2-3, Toronto's at 1-4, and we've got this Friday night Frisbee matchup with the 3-3 Breeze, who continue to just kind of punch just well enough to remind us that they're contenders, and this 3-4 New York team that is performing well on offense, but is having problems defensively for the first time in what feels like a decade. And there's so many interesting threads to pull on. I guess I'll kick it back to you. Where do you kind of want to start? I think we should, investigate, obviously, the Friday night matchup between what has been the most intense rivalry in the UFA the past several seasons, New York and DC, and how we're beginning of June, and this is kind of a Brinksman matchup for two blue-blooded franchises.
Yeah, I think I want to start here. Like, looking at the East Division, I asked myself, who are the championship contenders? And then the question, how is this playoff race going to sort itself out? Because those are two very different and both interesting questions. But you think about who the champions have been, and there are only a couple instances in the history of the league where a team suffered, a pretty bad loss from a margin standpoint and went on to win the championship. And one of them was last year. I mean, Minnesota got waxed a couple of times and found their way. And the year Madison won, they got clobbered by Carolina at home, I think, on Memorial Day weekend. And they came back to win. But, other than those two Central Division examples, and I don't know if there's any Central Division commentary to be had there, about whether it takes those teams longer to find their top form because it's cold through February, March, April when you're training and other teams are anyway. Is this DC squad as it's currently constituted still a championship caliber team? And I'd ask the same thing about New York, because they have a lot of the same names that, were kind of consensusly considered among the top 2 or 3 teams in the whole league over the course of this whole decade. And I mean, the Flyers are another team that had 4 losses during the season and went on to win a championship, but all those losses were by 1, so they were tight in every single game. And I just, when you see DC lose by 5 at Montreal, and when you see this Empire team, I mean, they're sitting at 3-4. It's disorienting. And obviously, these two teams for so many years battled in the regular season in a game that felt like it was, for home field advantage in the playoffs, because we're definitely going to see these two. Now both these teams are in serious danger of missing the playoffs. Unless they split the next 2 weeks, I think if one of these two, because they play this week and next week, if either New York or DC can win both, then I think it eliminates the loser. Because I just don't see, with how tightly packed everything is.
They're going to split it. They're going to split it given how 2025 has gone so far. Let's just put that in loose pen.
Yeah. It was really interesting watching Montreal take it to DC on Saturday, and then Toronto outplay New York in the fourth quarter on Sunday. That was a really tight game. And the Empire lose Sam Jonas about 35 minutes before the game with a groin injury. They're hopeful to get him back this Friday night, one of the best defenders in the league so far this year. Jack Williams wasn't going to play at Toronto this past Sunday, but he was there, and they could adjust the roster. It was right before the time where you can't. So basically New York's choice was, we could play 75, 80% Jack, or we could play with 19 players because Sam Jonas tweaked something and he wasn't good to go. So that's why Jack had that kind of strange, he's out there for a few D points here and there, but wasn't really a factor in the game. It was kind of just a weird dynamic for a guy that we're so used to seeing as being such a key structural piece for any team he's been on in his entire life. As a Frisbee player, one of the best in the league and best in the world. So, yeah, it was interesting to see how Toronto outplayed New York down the stretch in that game. And, I don't feel like I have a ton of trust in either DC or New York heading into Friday night Frisbee. And, these are two teams that are still kind of looking for their identity in a weird way at this point of the season for these two programs that have been so good for so long.
Well, I think the New York offense has certified itself as pretty reliable so far. They're fourth in offensive success rate. Ben Yot continues to be one of the most efficient receivers in the league. Calvin Brown is one of the most talented throwers. There is a punch that's returning to this Empire O that I think was lacking post-Babbitt and post-Osgar. But where they're really slipping is defensively. Again, they can't slow down opponents' attacks or get stops when they really need them. I mean, that was the problem in the fourth quarter against Toronto. They just could not get any sort of purchase against a rush team that, had this O-line assembled, 6 weeks ago? And that, I think, is such a departure from what we're used to with Empire. Again, look, you're talking about an injury report that hinges on the health of Sam Jonas. Sam Jonas couldn't stay on the field for this New York team, all respect to him, just last season. I mean, that's how deep this defense was going as recently as 2024. And now it's sort of this newsworthy point that he can't be in the active lineup, and that might be the reason why they lose by 2 goals in an away game at Toronto for the first time since 2017 or whatever it is. It's just this New York defense is so radically different in its personnel from what we're used to that I think we really have to recalibrate what we can expect from it week to week. And I think against DC, that has struggled to put up points on offense, the Breeze are going to be looking for a terrific opportunity to kind of catch a rhythm against an Empire coverage unit that can't really slow anyone down right now. Like, Tom Blasman was just having a field day against the Empire last weekend.
He was really good. The hammers that you showcased were awesome. And to your point, I mean, you said the Rush, put their offensive line together 6 weeks ago. Really, it was in the middle of week 2 that they kind of said, all right, we got to put all these foreign dudes out there in bigger roles. Because they started that DC game, which they lost by 1, with an O-line of Barbieri, Camire, Gallant, Lewis, Robinson, Stonehouse, and Lewis. No Carklands, no McHale, no Blasman. And by halftime of that game, they're like, all right, we need to put Arvids over there. And as the season has gone along, Luke Camire gets dinged up. Blasman steps right in. I think last week I said, how are they going to survive without Luke Camire? Not to say that they don't miss him, but Blasman certainly handled that role super well. Gallant has been a revelation so far this year. Really fun to watch. Really, really hard to guard.
I was thinking quietly that he reminded me so much of what Andrew Carroll brought to the rush attack for so many seasons when they were making perennial championship weekend appearances. But I think Gallant might be even more explosive. I mean, you watch him in the red zone, it's like a supercharged Jungst or something. Yeah. I mean, he just gets open at will.
Yeah. 5'6" dude, but 14 goals, 9 assists in 4 games. And not a rookie because he played 4 games with the Royale in 2023 and 7 games with the Outlaws in 2022. That's the Ottawa Outlaws for you UFA newbies out there who are just tuning in. Yeah, we had a team in Ottawa as well. This Toronto squad, you wonder, like, if they had a 6-week training camp, like a lot of teams had with their whole team, what would their record be right now? Because clearly they're a different team now than they were at the start of the season, and that's a good thing for them. And you'd think they will only keep getting better as long as they keep their pieces together. It was fun to see Mark Lloyd back on the field. I didn't quote this in the Tuesday toss, but Mark Lloyd told me that, where is it? He felt good defensively, but he's like, offensively, it was my worst 2 games I've ever played because, he was an out-of-town player late in like 2018 with a rush, but he was playing with all the guys that he had played with for 5 years. So he had such chemistry. The fact that he wasn't practicing with him regularly wasn't as big of a deal. Now he's got that whole new group of teammates, and he just, he was on D-line, but his numbers were pretty ugly for a low number of touches. It was kind of shocking to see. So presumably that gets better too. They kind of won despite his 2 throwaways and a drop against New York. But that block in crunch time was phenomenal.
The block against DC on Friday night is a salve over anything else you can say about his 2025 debut. Because, look, that was straight out of the throwback machine. Biggest moment of the game, need a takeaway, and who comes flying over the backside other than Mark Lloyd? You talk about there goes that man. Him doing that in his first game back, it's a bow on kind of what has been a fantastic season of moments like that, where it just feels like every weekend there's a dozen or more of those just kind of, that's the good stuff, plays. It's so much fun right now. And, this rush team, Montreal, Philly, they're all entangled in matchups as well coming up in week 7. You got Philly playing at Montreal on Friday night. And then on Saturday, the Royal have to turn around, travel to Toronto, and face this rush team that nobody in the East wants to face going forward. Again, these are 2 of quietly the best offenses in the league in Montreal and Toronto. We completely undersold these teams, but go ahead.
Yeah, Philly has to turn around and play Boston the next day too. Trying to think about what the standings are going to look like on
not even going to
try.
And I'll just sit back and wait, Evan. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole.
All right. Well, I'm here to let people know what's going to happen ahead of time. I think Philly's going to be 3-4 at the end of the weekend. I think they're going to lose both their games. I think Montreal is going to be 3-4. I think and I think Toronto is going to be 2-4, and I think DC is going to get to 4-3, and New York's going to be 3-5 in last place.
All right.
And that doesn't. It's crazy to think that the Empire would be in last place in the East Division at the midway point of the season, but that's the roadmap for that. There's no argument. Everything I just said is utterly
chewing
plausible.
On what you just moved through. You just put that over like it was gospel, and I've got to sit with it for just a moment because I can't find a reason to disagree with you, but I feel like I should, because that's a lot to take in. Is you just saying after week 7, 3-5 New York sitting in the cellar of the East Division standings. But again, they've got a pretty good offense, but just the way in which they cannot get stops in close situations, and there's so many small margin victories in this league right now, it's putting New York in the outside of the playoff picture. I wanted to touch on, and I was trying to before, of these Montreal and Toronto offenses. We talked about the European installation for Toronto's offense. Montreal, as you mentioned earlier in the episode, they've sort of been building to this moment. This is not necessarily a totally new look Royale attack, and yet it's just humming right now. They've put up a couple of impressive performances against New York and DC, not the best defenses this season, but pretty reputable units. And Quentin Bonad is firing out there. You've got Kevin Quinlan, Jacob Brissett, and Tremblay Jonka throwing the disc. Those might be, a top 5 kind of throwing trio in the league right now with how they're performing. It's hard to kind of put too many units above them. Philip Lebordet
top
is
5
really
throwing trio in the league right now. That's. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just haven't thought about it like that.
CTJ has the best forehand in the East Division aside from Calvin Brown right now. Calvin Brown, I would say, is number 1, kind of whichever throw you really want to choose. But CTJ is launching absolute missiles from the half-field stripe. And it's just kind of, cash in, cash out for the Royale offense when they get a look one-on-one downfield to Bonad, or again, Lebordet has been playing really well. Jeremy Hill continues to make clutch plays when the team needs him. It's, again, really cool seeing him return from injury and be such an impactful player in his first season with Montreal. It's just kind of all clicking for the Royale. I mean, especially after that 0-3 start, it felt like they had found some looks but couldn't really find fourth quarter consistency. Right now, they're really performing at the end of these games. And I just think it's such a credit to like what they've been building over the last several years.
One more thing to mention, Adam, and I don't mean to critique you here, but because I don't think you're wrong. But, I said New York could be in last place this weekend if the results orient themselves a certain way. New York's already in last place among East Division teams in the Week 6 power rankings that you authored on WatchUFA.com.
Well,
You got
yeah,
New York number 15, and they're Toronto's 14, Montreal's 13, Philly's 12. Like, they're all bunched up. And it's I mean, like, look, New York can still prove itself these next couple weeks. Like, the whole season is still in front of them. And there is a roadmap where New York figures out who they are and runs the table. Because, look, if they can get this one on the road at DC, this ends their odyssey of road games. And New York has a pretty favorable schedule relative to their divisional opponents down the stretch, in part because after this week, they do not have another road game all year. So their final 4 games after this are all at home: DC, Toronto, Philly, and Boston. So look, even if they lose this week and are in last place, they could handle their business at home and get to 7-5 and be in the playoffs. I am not burying the Empire by any means by saying I think they're going to lose and be in last place after this weekend.
I'm not burying them, but this has been a similar line of logic since they lost at Oakland in week 1, which is that, all right, chips didn't fall where we want them to this time. We'll get the next matchup. Now we're at 4 losses. This is the most this team has had, cumulatively over several seasons before this. It's I think a different mental hurdle for them to have to continue to rebuild that confidence week after week as they're slowly slipping in the standings. And look, I tend to agree with you too. They were also down Marquez Brownlee this past weekend. He's going to be in the lineup this weekend. He is an absolute difference maker no matter where they put him in the lineup. I think that New York has the horses to make a late season push, especially with their kind of homestand schedule lining up. I'm just saying we can't keep expecting them to get a W in the ways that we have for so long with this Empire franchise, right? Like, you can't just say, well, when they're at full strength, they'll get that W. That's not the case in the East Division anymore.
No Christian Boxley for DC this weekend as well.
Right.
So that's a big loss for the Breeze. They've been a very different offense with him versus without him. Can I go back to the question that I posed at the start about the East Division? Like, do you still consider this New York team a championship contender in 2025? And how many of these East Division teams could you realistically envision hoisting the trophy at championship weekend in Madison this August?
Right now, outside of Boston, I don't know that there is a championship team that has sort of proven itself in the East Division. I think they've all presented pretty glaring foibles. Like this DC team, I think, has a roster that we associate with the potential to make championship weekend, but there is a clear glass ceiling on their ability to score through the first 6 games of this season. Like, they just cannot produce enough points to really pull away from opponents at any point during a game. So they just end up having to claw out their victories, like even against Carolina a few weekends ago. That was their most impressive game of the season. They won by 2 on the road. The Flyers were challenging well into the fourth quarter of that game. It just felt like DC's confidence kind of carried them over the finish line. But again, there isn't anything guaranteed in the UFA in 2025. And so I don't think we can rest on the similar sorts of laurels that we have with these very talented teams that we have as recently as 2024, right? Like, I think DC still has a lot to prove. I think New York, 3-4, has a lot to prove as a sub 500 team. Crazy thing to say. Again, Montreal, Toronto, they started the season winless for the first several weeks, the first month of the season. Can they make a run? possibly, but they have some quirks to work through. There's just, I don't know how to untangle the mess that is the East Division. I as you started off the segment saying, I think it's a good problem to have, but I really think it's going to take this month of June to prove who can raise up to that image of, okay, they could be raising a trophy, you know? I think that's even the problem that we had when we saw Philly start off so strongly was, man, this is early. Man, these schedules get grueling, you know, once the summer months pick up. And what happens when the rubber really meets the road?
I will slightly disagree because, and I'm glad we got that soundbite, by the way, of you saying that no other East team other than Boston could win, because we're going to cut that up and throw that into some hype video at some point. The talent on all these teams, particularly Philly, DC, and New York, and New York's championship experience, they've lost a lot of it, but they still have a bunch too. If they're able to get hot and make a run and get to championship weekend, like look, Boston, we haven't seen since when? Since May 18th. It's now June 5th. And that was an impressive performance. The second game of their weekend at DC, they won 14-11. That was their only road game so far this year. So they'll play and probably beat a Philly team that's on the second day of a back-to-back in Boston this weekend. They're probably going to be 5-0. But 5 of their last 7 are going to be on the road. None of them are gimme road games, obviously. I mean, at Montreal, at Toronto, we saw how DC and New York fared up there. Yes, Boston has looked stronger than those teams, but Boston historically has not been the greatest road team. The win over DC notwithstanding. So I think Boston is going to come back to the pack a little bit. I think they are absolutely the favorite to host the East Division final and will probably go something like 10-2, 9-3. I mean, but you look at the standings right now, everybody aside from Boston and Philly already have at least 3 losses. Like Boston could very reasonably go 5-3 in their last 8 and finish 9-3 and easily finish a game or two ahead of second place. So I think Boston has the roadmap to being the favorite, but they will come back to the pack. They're not going to go undefeated or anything like that. And I think the rest of this division, especially New York, like I have this kind of crazy juxtaposition in my mind. Like I think New York is most likely to miss the playoffs, but I also think they're the number 1 East Division championship contender outside of Boston because of Benyat and Solomon Rushmeyer-Bailey and John Randolph and Marquez Brownlee. And I wish I could say, you know, the Dross and all the other guys that have been like they are a different team from the team that won championships. But if they got to the Final Four, I don't know.
John Randolph and Benyat and all the names that you just named just lost to Toronto. Like, okay, like we're just naming names. Like I agree with you. These are legendary players, but in 2025, it's just a gauntlet. It doesn't matter anymore. Throw out all that knowledge. Like I think aside from Boston, because of their athleticism and size, each of these East Division, you know, contenders for a playoff spot have some blemishes to work out. Now, I'm not saying that by the end of the season, they can't progress and kind of form themselves into a more matured version that we might say is a championship contender. But no, I disagree with you. I think that Boston, because of its both, you know, kind of winning pedigree the past season plus its level of talent is ahead of the pack. I don't know that we see them kind of fall back. I think it will take me seeing that to believe it. I do not see them having really a challenger right now, given their schedule. I think if they were to play like an Atlanta team or Chicago or Minnesota, that would be very interesting. But I don't know that they get that challenge before championship weekend right now. I think that they're a very, very good matchup against everyone in the East. They're so big, Evan. This Boston team is so big and so fast. They just kind of force of will outmatch opponents, like 1-to-1 across the board each and every game. every quarter. And we've talked about before on the show, they're about to get an injection of collegiate talent that we haven't seen yet. They're about to get faster and younger.
Yeah, and I've gone back and forth in my own head. Like, do I think their offense is among the best in the league, or is their defense among the best in the league, or is it both? And
Well, and
it's probably both.
as I mentioned in my power rankings, they're the only team to match up as a top 5 team in both offensive success rate and limiting opponents to the lowest offensive conversion rate. So, they're good
And
on both sides of the disc.
despite that, I don't expect them to go to Montreal and Toronto on back-to-back days next weekend and sweep that. And
Yeah.
if they can go 1-1, that's a really good weekend, because then they'd still have just one loss and probably be a couple games clear. But then they close the season at Philly, at DC, at New York, and if we assume that no team among that 3 is going to be eliminated before then, that Philly DC is a back-to-back, July 11th and July 12th, and then the New York game's a week later. Those could be absolute must-win games for those home teams, and there probably won't be must-win games for Boston. And that's another thing that I think is going to matter late in the year. The segue I want to make now, though, we talk why I think you have to think the East is deeper than just Boston in terms of championship contenders. There's a clear top 3 in the West right now. And that'll shake out in the weeks ahead. We got really enticing Salt Lake Oakland game in the Bay on Friday night. Obviously, Colorado just handed the Spiders their first loss. I know you got New York 15 in your power rankings below each of those top 3 West teams. And I know that we've seen New York lose in Oakland already. However, I think historically, I would still have East favored over West based upon what we have seen at championship weekend over the past 5 years.
But again, that's the historical lens. We're in 2025. That's clearly not proven to be the case. New York is 3-4. Salt Lake and Oakland are combined 9-2. One of them has a 5-goal win against New York. We don't have to hypothesize about it so far this season. I don't disagree with you, though. I think in what you're saying, as far as East has a power fulcrum that we associate with championship contenders in this league. And I just think we need to kind of reimagine it. And I'm glad you brought up these West Division games, because we get on Friday night a peek at the first meeting between the Shred and the Spiders of the season. And you have this Shred team that is playing like Children of Rufio or something. It feels like, kind of Peter Panish, especially on D-line. They've just got so much energy, man. They just run at you all day. There's Jorgensen's coming at you. Will Selfridge back in the lineup bumps the ceiling of this team up a notch or 3. They're imposing as far as their youth and vigor. And then you've got this Oakland team that, after suffering a loss at Colorado, where the Summit kind of outplayed the Spiders at their own game. We've been talking about how fantastic the Spiders' offensive attack has looked through the first month or so of the season. Colorado looked even better, with the additions of Tobias Brooks, Zeke Thorson, and Elliot Hawkins, etc. And so now I think you really get a chance to witness whether the Shred offense or the Spiders offense is the more real deal. I think it'll be incumbent on each of the team's defenses to kind of prove that they're more than just highlight reel blocks, that they can really have some effective defensive drives that lead to a winning outcome. Because I think a lot of the defenses in the West like to do the big block downfield and then kind of have a jailbreak in transition, score really quickly, and not have too much of resistance. But I think in these tighter matchups, we really needed to see from both of these teams, if they want to be certifiable contenders, that they can kind of take a little bit more discipline in cashing in those break scores, right? Because I do think that there's still a little bit more wide open play in that West Division. And I'm excited to see which of these teams between Salt Lake and Oakland is the better team in the West.
Yeah, it's going to be a really fascinating game, and I'm super excited to call New York, D.C. at 7 Eastern and then watch this game, hopefully at a bar with a beer at 9 Eastern, because Salt Lake and Oakland are both really good at what they do, but Salt Lake has the D-line inexperience that they've played through and hasn't been the biggest deal in terms of impacting their results so far this season, but that is absolutely a question mark for this team still. These young guys, the Pugh brothers, Caden Fruebe, Derek Knighton, all these young D-line guys, they're no Ben Ashton, who's one of the veterans for the Shred D-line this weekend. Like, I just am curious to see how Salt Lake's D-line is able to convert and how many chances they get to convert against Oakland's offense that had some hiccups at Colorado, no doubt, but I still think deserves to be talked about, side by side with Atlanta and Boston as the most impressive O-lines in the league so far this year. Like, I'm scared to conquer the question of who's the rookie of the year. You wrote in the power rankings that Adam Reese, the rookie of the year candidate. I'm like, is he the best rookie on his team?
Right now, yeah. I mean, he's unguardable. I'll just say it. Like, other than like a Halsmeyer or somebody, he presents such a problem everywhere in the field, and he just, it's sort of the thing of sometimes you don't always get the entire route that players run on a given broadcast angle, but he'll just sort of be doing his stuff downfield. The disc will be plinkoing around everywhere in the Spiders system, and then they'll just cap it off with him 5 yards from anyone just running away and clap catching it. The amount of times that he's just had easy goals running away from people is indicative of how dominant he's been. And again, this is his first 6 games of the season. I know we expected it from him. He's been a fantastic player at every level he's, started at, but Reese has just come in and been, one of the top 3 to 5 players in the division, and obviously up for, I think, already award consideration at the end of this year. And it's nothing to take away from Leo Gordon and some of the other great players who are making, their debuts as professionals in this league. I just think it speaks to Reese was cashing in Colorado still. I mean, I know the Spiders lost, but Summit didn't have anything to stop Reese downfield.
Yeah, and you're probably right. I mean, Reese has more scores than Gordon. He's got a higher completion percentage. He's got half as many throwaways. Gordon has a very slight, basically meaningless edge in total yards. The Spiders' offense would not be the same if they lost either of those guys, obviously. The way they work together with Magzig and Frankenberg. I mean, you take that 4 versus the Halsmeyer, Taylor, Austin, Nab, Miller 4, or, the Sadok, Babbitt, Stoughton, DeCrana 4. Like, Orion Cable probably deserves to be mentioned in there too. Like,
yeah,
that's what we're talking about with, the foundational pieces of these O-lines. And the Spiders were missing Jason Valley last week. And he, if I'm not mistaken, is active this week. I'm remembering that correctly. He didn't play at Colorado, right?
Correct. And he's been one of the most fun player evolutions to watch throughout his career, going from a lockdown defender into this very effective distributor. And again, a really quietly great defensive piece should Oakland turn it. I think that's a really underrated quality about this Spiders offense as well. They play really good coverage if they do turn it. They don't allow defenses a lot of easy opportunities to score. You got to really work it against the Spiders D-line offense, or excuse me, O-line defense. But yeah, I think Valley's addition will be a great piece that they were lacking last weekend in Colorado. And I just want to take another second to talk about Frankenberg, because he's been playing like a madman this season. He's a league leader in scores, I believe, so far. Or he's right up there. He's been averaging around 7 per game throughout most of this season. And he just continues to play. Oh, Laviolette's at 47, Frankenbird's at 44 in second place for total scores through the first 6 weeks of the season. But Frankenbird has just been playing at a different pace. Like, he's just been throttling defenders with his speed, with that kind of stop, start cut he does. He's got one of the best acceleration, deceleration kind of setups, I think, of any player in the league. And again, he just sort of wheels off of whoever else is sort of working with him in that downfield space. He's got such good, I think, sense for how to attack a defense, and continues to be just uber producer for the Spiders.
No, you're right. I mean, it feels like he's gotten faster in his third season in the league.
Yeah.
And, I just pulled up his page. Like, in 2023, he played all 12 games, 42 goals, 23 assists. Last year, 10 games, 22 goals, 29 assists. He's 22 and 22 at the midway point of the season. Like, he's on pace to have 40 and 40 of each, which would be a huge accomplishment that we don't see that often anymore in the modern in the modern AUDL or in the current UFA.
He had a great game in the playoffs last year in that first round matchup at Seattle too. It felt like he ended 2024 with some of his best Frisbee, and he's just carried that over into 2025 because he is a demon right now to cover. It's so much. It feels like the Spiders can overwhelm you at so many points of attack.
The other thing, Adam, about this Salt Lake Oakland game, first time we're seeing Bryce Merrill coach against Caleb Merrill and Merriam, and I think they're both really good coaches that have put their teams in good spots and manage a game and try to do things to get their opponent off balance. I'm excited to see kind of the chess match there, especially this Oakland team, coming off a loss back home. I think I lean the Spiders' way, but I also, nothing would surprise me. Like, if Salt Lake went in there and blitzed them and Oakland didn't know what hit them, I think Salt Lake has that ceiling just with their youth and athleticism and their fire, like we saw in the second half against Seattle. Like, they can stampede a team even if that team is really good. But I do think Oakland will be able to hold their own as well. And, yeah, this is just an awesome game. One of the many this weekend. And, Colorado, after their win against Oakland, just kind of gets to sit back and relax a little bit because they have a good bit of time off before their next game, right? And they, like the Flyers, in a way, Colorado turned their season around. And I know they were just 2-2, but the magnitude of that third quarter run to create separation against Oakland, it feels like it changes the trajectory and path for the Summit. And I got to get your thoughts on Tobias Brooks and what he did in his first game of the year and his first game ever with the Summit.
I mean, look, he's kind of one of those talents where you chart his growth like you do a child with the markings on a wall, their height. You'll line them up against the kitchen wall and sort of take a little pencil and be like, oh, you're this tall today. I feel like we've been charting visibly Brooks's growth for the past, 2 seasons. The thing is that every single time we set a level, he exceeds it on his own, right? And that's what we saw with his 2025 debut. We came into 2025 hyping the Christ out of this man and what he would mean kind of playing for the team in the same state as his college squad and, being with his teammates and what that would mean and how he's a terrific playmaker and how, he'll fit in right alongside Atkins and Feiner and Kuhlman and the rest of this high-octane Colorado attack. What does he come in and do? He drops nearly 1,000 yards and just dominates 4 quarters, makes the biggest grab in the clutch to get the ceiling drive for the Summit, and just, again, raises the bar on a professional career that I think is really blossoming into potentially one of the best ever. That's the kind of ceiling we got to start talking about with him. And look at it. Look at the film that he just put on. He's got breakaway speed in the open flat. He's leading the team in throwing. He's the most dominant receiver when he wheels downfield. He's 21. Like, he was, he was the Pabst Light Player of the Week, and I had to hesitate for a second if he was even able to consume that product. And it's just like, he continues to show a new facet to his game seemingly every start. And again, that was game one. That was game one against the best team in the division. What's next? I don't know. You can't map it anymore. You can't plot his
Yeah.
and I think that that's the biggest credit you can say to him, is that he's in charge of it going forward. It's his path to take.
It was just striking how, like, Quinn Finer was a different player with Tobias Brooks out there. And Quinn's one of the best players in the country. Team USA, just a dynamic, versatile, all league perennial threat.
Absolutely.
And the way Quinn looked different, just the space is open differently with Tobias. It was really impressive. And obviously, all the college guys stepped in and played well. Donovan Fink, Zeke Thorson, and Elliot Hawkins. Like, what a feeder system to have, when the college season ends. I know it's tricky to have to wait for the season to end. And that's a hard decision for certain teams. Like, talking with Ben Feldman last week, they've got a couple Carleton guys that just won the national championship that are kind of on their practice squad. And it's like, yeah, they could throw these guys into the lineup immediately, but they also have the depth and the guys that have been practicing with the team. And, theoretically, none of these guys, even though they want them to be in the Winchell program over the next 3-4 years, they're not going to be ready to contribute until June. And I think Colorado is a team that maybe doesn't have the type of institutional depth that a team like Minnesota does. So it's like, yeah, we'll take you whenever we can get you. But it's always tricky, right? When these college kids jump in, and, with Ryan Dusair, who's on the Minnesota practice squad, who is this elite defender at college nationals, like, could you envision him being a dominant force alongside James Pollard and Dylan DeClerc and Justin Burnett on the Minnesota squad? Sure. Yeah,
Thomas Schopp was already a standout starter for him as a teenage rookie last year as they made a championship run.
Yeah, the difference with Schopp is he was a member of the Winchell before he was a member of Carleton. That's the slight tweak there. But yeah, it's an interesting dynamic coming off the college season and where teams choose to put their resources. And hopefully we got another great weekend of Frisbee ahead. And like, we got 13 more games this weekend, right?
Yeah, and before we go, we have to talk about another South Division set of games. Markedly, the Austin Soul 4-0, their road trip through SoCal. They play at LA on Friday night, and then they face the 5-2 Growlers on Saturday night. Austin and the Growlers have played a couple times in the past in interdivisional matchups, so that'll be an interesting reprisal for them as they battle at the top of the South Division standings.
Remember, Adam, sorry, that they also played in divisional matchups because Austin was the member of the West for a year too.
Yep. Austin is one of the 3 remaining undefeateds alongside Boston and Chicago. They've been on buys the past 2 weeks, I believe. I believe it's been 2 weeks since we've last seen the Soul. Mm-hmm. They've looked good against semi-playoff level competition so far. They got that win against Colorado in the second game of a back-to-back. They got a win against Madison, again, on the second game of a back-to-back. This is the real first test for the Soul squad. It's going on the road and facing these 2 SoCal teams. I know LA is 1-4, but that offense has some nice pieces. James Franklin, Sean McDougal, Lyle, they can get out and run on you. And Austin has, I think, the athletes on the defensive side of the disc to handle it. I'm just interested to see how much of this Texas athleticism can handle a plane trip and I think some South Division squads that are looking to put Austin in its place a little bit. The Growlers, I think, are absolutely teeing up for that second game on Saturday night. And I think that, the Soul, for as good as Jackson Potts, Kyle Henke, and that offensive look, they're gonna have some I think standards to meet on this road trip coming up.
It's a really interesting weekend for them. I think going back to what I was saying before about a team like New York at 3-4, like, yeah, they're 3-4. Yeah, Austin's 4-0. I think it's way more likely that New York wins the championship this year than Austin. So, like, Austin hasn't sold me as a true championship contender. However, if they sweep this weekend, I will rethink that. I am open to rethinking it because Austin's offense has been impressive. They've gotten faster. They are really well coached. And I'm sure they're going to be ready for whatever Kevin Stewart and Kayla Helton and their D-line throws at them on the second day of a back-to-back. I lean toward the Growlers because they're at home, because they've played well, and because they'll be fresher. But this is a huge prove-it game for the Austin Soul, which it's not easy to have the prove-it game on the second day of a back-to-back. Like, it's much easier for a team to have that be the first game of the weekend, and then the second game is house money. This is a very different circumstance. I mean, that's kind of what it was for DC this past weekend, right? Like, they got the win on Friday at Toronto. So, yeah, they lost it Saturday, but it was still a 1-1 weekend. That was still a big road win to sweep the Rush, and they still came out of the weekend feeling pretty good about themselves. If Austin goes 1-1 this weekend, but they just win at LA, a team that only has the double OT win over Houston, which was a crazy, exciting game. Shout out to the Aviators and James Franklin and Sean McDougal for making those crazy plays down the stretch. But yeah, in order for me to take Austin seriously as a threat, I need to see it this weekend because, look, they still have a road trip to Carolina and Atlanta ahead later this month. But these are the two road trips that are, quite frankly, going to define the Soul's regular season. This West Coast road trip to SoCal and then the trip to the Southeast later this month. I think they have the pieces, but we got to see it on 2 days of a back-to-back against really elite competition for me to really take them seriously.
I want to see if this Soul swagger travels because that's been a really interesting part of their 4-0 start, right? Is that they're such a young team and they come in and they want to bang around and they want to make highlights on you and they don't care about a little bit of physicality. I think that's a really good identity for them. I'm interested to see if they can keep that up throughout this entire weekend coming up. Mark Henke, Noah Powell, those guys have been playing lights out on the defensive side. Can they continue that kind of pressure against the Growlers offensive attack, which I think deserves consideration for like a top 5 kind of unit in 2025. I think, they're still not quite at that Atlanta, Oakland level that we were just talking about, Colorado when they have all their pieces. But I think the Growlers have shown that they can put up a lot of points. Marcel Osborne, Matt Miller, those guys are having career years. Khalif El-Salam is playing like the true star that he is. He looks more focused than he has, I think, maybe at any point in his pro career. He seems to really want it. I think there's the unspoken element of Goose Helton returning to health on the sideline and being another part of that coaching staff. I mean, he came back from the brink, man. That San Diego team went through it, at the exact same time that Helton was recovering from his horrific motorcycle accident. He's leading a lot of the conditioning and training still for that Growlers team to this day. He's one of the first off the sideline after scores and after points conclude, talking to guys this year. I think his presence has been such a boon to this team. And I think if you talk to anyone on San Diego, they'll be the first to tell you him being around just makes it different here. And again, I think that Austin is going to have to take, again, all the superlatives and I think accolades that you said, like the good coaching, the good system. They're going to have to go into San Diego and face a Growlers team that, again, they're my dark horse right now. Like they lost close games to Atlanta. Like those were within their grasp. And that's a team that we consider a championship contender. Growlers, a couple different plays go their way. I think we would be talking about them a lot differently this season. So I think that they're absolutely salivating for this opportunity to take down a potentially undefeated Austin squad.
And it's a bigger game for the Growlers because of the schedule that they've got coming up with 2 games against Oakland still to be played as well.
Isn't that awesome? Isn't that so tantalizing? We haven't had the Oakland San Diego matchup, which I'll just say, like, that hasn't held a whole bunch of stakes the past couple of years. Those two teams do not like each other. That will be a contentious set of games.
Yeah, yeah. And I love what you said, Adam, about Goose. Like, I mean, one of the original one-of-one stars in this league. For those who don't know the history, he was the MVP in 2012 with Indy. He was the MVP in 2013 with Chicago. He was the first player to suit up for a different team in every division in the league. He played for DC and he played for Carolina, and then he went out west. And like just a guy that's really easy to love and to watch him. I mean, it's a documentary what he went through outside of Frisbee and the way he devoted himself to training to, I mean, like he was this close for a year to having his leg amputated. It could have been amputated on the spot, the day of the incident. It could have been amputated during any of the 30-something surgeries he had after the fact. And the fact that he is on the sidelines in sneakers, walking relatively normally, it is a miracle. And it is one of the greatest stories in our league, in our sport, in the half century plus of its existence.
I concur with you, and I hesitate to bring it up because I'm so sensitive about it. It's one of the true things in this league that makes me emotional, just because I feel the same way about him as probably you do, where he was one of the first touch points, and all that kind of storytelling that you were saying. He's one of the first touch points for me in this league. He was one of the first people that I interviewed back when all I was doing was writing a couple of stories here and there for the then AUDL in 2013. And I cannot tell you how much it meant to just have him be nice. He's somebody who I think is stridently nice no matter what else is going on. And I think that kind of composure has really suffused itself throughout this Growlers organization. Again, you just talk to anybody and within a couple of sentences, somebody's going to bring up Goose. That's
Were you really?
He has.
Were you writing stories about the league in 2013?
2013, Tyler DiGirolamo and Alex Thorne joining.
So that was 2014.
No,
I
know.
Okay.
I know. But that was one of my first assignments. But 2013, yeah, it was with Goose because we wanted to cover a little bit more because he was going to be the back-to-back MVP and he was putting up, what were the stat lines back then? He was putting up 50,
oh,
50,
God.
50 seasons. He had some absolutely my player stat lines,
Yeah, I mean, 2013
on rookie mode and just kind of range around and do whatever you want season.
Assist, goals, blocks. In 12, it was 57, 30, and 38. In 13, it was 43, 26, and 37. That does not include the playoffs. You add in the playoff numbers in 2012. Officially, his credit was 64 assists, 34 goals, and 46 blocks. Unless the league grows to 16 games or 20 games, no one's ever getting 46 blocks in a season again anytime soon.
No.
Different times.
No.
They averaged 35, 40 turnovers a game back then.
Yeah. Suffice it to say, the numbers well short of the man, right? He's different, man, and it's so cool to see him back. And again, it's just sort of a heartbeat at the center of this Growlers 2025 season, where again they're feisty, man. They play too with that swagger. I'm really interested to see the head-to-head of this Growlers versus Soul. I think that there's gonna be some fireworks between these two teams. There's gonna be a lot of talking.
Yeah, Growlers, Spiders too. Plenty of chatter in the weeks and months ahead. I gotta run to the airport here pretty soon and head up to DC and Friday night Frisbee Empire Breeze to launch this what hopefully is another exhilarating weekend of Ultimate. So, I don't know what's going to happen. And, I like to think of the different roadmaps of possibilities. And that's why I said, New York could finish in last place. New York could also be in second place at the end of the weekend. If they win at DC and Philly loses a couple of games, New York's in second. So that's how tight things are in the East right now. And let the games begin.
I mean, again, everyone is on the brink, and yet everything is on the table. As we started off saying in this episode, Carolina could either potentially be quasi-eliminated at the end of this weekend, or they could be within a game of Atlanta. Like, it's chaos. But that'll probably do it for this episode of Swing Pass. Evan and I thank you for tuning in past this 90-minute mark of recording. A lot to say, but a lot going on. Really looking forward to this Week 7 slate of games. You can catch it on UFA YouTube and watch UFA TV. That'll do it for us here and now. But remember, Frisbee forever. Bye.